still in this parenthetical pause. This is not advancing our storyline. It's kind of, he took a pause. Last week we heard about the two witnesses that were witnessing, I believe, in the first half of the tribulation. And now he's going back to tell a story. And he starts off in verse 1. It says, "Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars." So, right off the bat, it's a great sign. He's having a vision. And so, in this vision, he sees what's going on. And so imagine with a vision, Joseph interpreted dreams, right? We know about, well, most of us know, many of us. Joseph interpreted dreams, Daniel interpreted dreams, and if you saw the dreams, they were always weird, right? But they interpreted for us so we can understand what they meant. But in the dream, it wasn't just like a vision where it's like, okay, I saw the church, and Bonnie walked in, and then she sat down in the middle row, and then that actually meant that Bonnie was going to walk into the church and sit in the middle row. Like, that's just like okay, that's exactly what was going to happen. These are like, there's loaves of bread, and there's fat cows, and there's thin cows, and there's statues made of different metals, but they would go back and they'd explain. Okay, the metals, why gold and silver? Well, because an inferior nation is going to take you over. That's why it's a silver under the gold, and that's why the cows are thin, because there's going to be famine. And so that's what we're going to see really through the next couple chapters, is a lot of very symbolic stuff, but again, it goes right back to the Old Testament. Or they go on and explain it later on. Well, that was actually symbolic of this. And they tell you straightforward. And so sometimes we get caught up in these big pictures because it's like a pretty amazing scene to imagine. But when we actually get a chance to look at it, it goes right back to the Old Testament and it makes perfect sense. So, that said, he has this great sign. And in this great sign, he sees a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. So, with that, we're going to take a flip back and look at Genesis chapter 37. So in Genesis 37, and I didn't do any bookmarks, just so that we're on a level playing field with all this flipping around. In Genesis 37, Joseph, whom I just mentioned, the dreamer of dreams, and is the Technicolor dream code, as they say in the play or whatnot, he's having these dreams, and he's interpreting them. And in there, we find, in verses 9 through 11, one of his dreams. And it says in Genesis 37:9, "Then he dreamed still another dream, and told it to his brothers, and said, 'Look, I have dreamed another dream, and this time,'" so he already had one he interpreted, "'the sun and the moon and the 11 stars bowed down to me.' So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, 'What is this dream you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I,'" identifying the sun and the moon, "'bow down to the earth before you with his brothers?' And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind." So really, this is the only other picture we have in the Bible of this moon and the sun and 12 stars, but it pictures the stars being the sons of Jacob. His dad was Jacob, who after wrestling with God was renamed Israel. And so it's a picture of his dad, Isaac, and his wife. And then they have these 12 stars representing Israel. And realistically, this is representing Israel, but it could even predate the 12 sons. I'm thinking this is the promised line. This is who the Messiah was going to come through, is this woman. And we'll see more, and the picture will make more clear as it goes, but there's been different interpretations of who this woman could be, but most of them fall short when you just start going through your Bible and looking at this. So here we have the woman. Then it says, verse 2, "Then being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth." So here's the woman, and she's in travail. She is in labor, and we find that actually in the Bible there are numerous references to Israel actually being a woman in travail. Let's see if I actually get my slide thing to work. Well, we're working on it. So, there it is. So, Israel, woman in travail. All those verses up there that you can see, there's in Isaiah, there's in Jeremiah, there's in Micah, there's also more verses that aren't even on that list. But talking about Israel as a woman in travail, and that she's going through birth pains. So this is something you see again and again in the Bible. And it says she's going to give birth to a child. And we're going to see more about the child down in verse 4 and 5. So keep the child on the back burner for right now. But verse 3 says, another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems, which are crowns, kingly crowns, on his heads. So, right off the bat, we've got this dragon. Now, the dragon is pretty easy to identify as being Satan. So, you can just jump to verse 9. We'll be there in a few verses, but it's straightforward. The dragon is Satan. This chapter explains it pretty much clear and simple. And then you've got this thing about these 7 heads, and then you've got 10 horns and 7 diadems. And here's the fun part is that I'm not even going to tell you what they are today. That means you have to come back again, right? This is the best part is that you're going to have to come back and find out on your own. But chapter 17 explains what these are. So later in Revelation, when we hit chapter 17, it goes in detail. So I'm just saving that for then because we've got ground to cover today. But a good cross reference you should have in your Bible in this section would be Daniel chapter 7, verses 7 and 8, and also verses 24 and 25. So those are 2 good cross references you should have. And again, it talks about this vision of Daniel, and he sees these heads and these horns and these crowns. And so if you go back and look at it, I'm saving it again for chapter 17. So chapter 17, we're going to dig deep on that. But for now, we're just going to be moving forward. And we'll find out what those things represent. Maybe a sneak peek is in chapter 17. It tells you straightforward that the 7 heads are 7 great nations. So even when the Bible tells you the 7 heads are 7 great nations, we should believe that the 7 heads represent 7 great nations that have ruled over the earth. So some of this it already explains for us ahead of time. But now, Satan being the focus right now. In verse 4 it says, his tail drew 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth to devour her child as soon as it was born. Now, it says his tail drew 1/3 of the stars. Now, if you look at Daniel chapter 8, verse 10, it talks about the hosts of heaven and then the stars of heaven, and it puts them together in one category. That stars are symbolic of angels. We see that again and again. Even if you just flip back one page in your Bible to chapter 9, you'll see that the 5th angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven, and to him was given the key. So it talks about whether even actually angels or fallen angels. We see stars being symbolic. So that's a pretty common one in the Bible. But now, here's the big key, is that he gets thrown out of heaven. The Bible talks a lot about Satan being thrown out of heaven. You can look at Ezekiel, you can look at Isaiah, and you can learn a lot about who he is and the character of Satan. And I didn't know how much time we'd have to go, but really, he's a main character we're focusing on today, is who is the devil? What has his game been? What are his plans? And so first we see about how he's thrown out of heaven. Jesus even said he saw him falling like lightning. Like when he was cast out of heaven, he came down, but from the very beginning, he's had his eye to devour the woman's child. Now, while I said I think the woman is symbolic of Israel, I think you can take it back to the beginning. You could say she may even be Eve, but really it's Eve descending down through Israel because it's Genesis 3:15. Genesis 3:15 is what is more fashionably called the Proto-Evangelion, which is fancy talk for the first mention of the gospel. You talk to guys who are like Bible nerds, and Proto-Evangelion will impress them if you say that. So you can throw that in your pocket and look really, really scholarly at some other date. But I know a band called Proto-Evangelion as well. So Genesis 3:15. Genesis 3:15. I'm not going to flip there right now, but I'll tell you. What it is the fall happened, right? Satan came, he deceived Eve, she ate of the fruit, and she got Adam to eat it too. Then God basically says, all right, sin has entered the earth. You all now will die. And then, curses the ground for your sake. He goes on, but part of it, in verse 15, he tells the woman that you're going to have pain in childbirth. Think, ladies, that was not originally part of the plan. Pain in childbirth wasn't on the table until they ate of the fruit. That's right. So, but he tells them that I'm going to put enmity between your seed and the serpent's seed. See, the serpent was Satan. He's going to get called that in verse 9, just to make sure we're talking about the same guy. This is not, different fallen angels or Satan, the devil, Lucifer. There's all these different names for him. He has many faces, but it says that there's going to be a conflict there between Satan and the woman's seed, which is also interesting because everywhere else in the Bible, the seed always comes from the man, when you're talking about production and procreation. But with her, it's her seed, which is interesting because there was no man involved in the birth of Christ. And it says that you, the serpent, you're going to bruise his heel, but he's going to crush your head. That there will be an injury to this offspring that the promise is going to come through, but he's going to utterly defeat you. And so it's interesting to see what Satan does. Let me read you a little list that I put together, because Satan, the next chapter, Genesis 4, and I believe he's the deceiver, he's the father of all lies, the Bible says. Genesis chapter 4, Cain murders Abel. You would think that Abel would have been the son, right? I mean, there's a chosen son. You're going to have a son, and he's going to be the one. And you have Cain and Abel, the bad one and the good one. And there's many other sons and daughters, the Bible does say. But Satan gets his way with Cain, gets in his head, and he kills his brother. But it wasn't that son that was the chosen one for the bloodline to pass through. But you'll see in Genesis 6 that the bloodline of Seth does get contaminated. And it's a crazy long story there, but you find out that talks about this, that the sons of God and the daughters of men come together, and there's all these people, but they find Noah, who's perfect in his generations, the Bible says, literally genealogy, that he had a clean bloodline coming down from Adam. But after that, you see more attempts to try and get at this promised son. In Genesis 12 and 20, there are attempts at raping Sarah. In Genesis 26, Rebekah. So you have Abraham's wife, then you have Isaac's wife, people trying to take advantage of these women. Esau then gets so mad at Jacob that he tries to kill him. So now you have the brothers going after each other. Finally, we make it into Exodus, where what? Chapter 1, Pharaoh commands to kill all the firstborn of the Israelites, right? Kill off all the sons. Again and again and again, we see this attack on Israel. We see King Saul always trying to kill King David. We have, I think it's Athaliah, the queen who kills all but one remaining child in the royal family, right? She kills everyone. It's her own family. She's trying to be, I'm the queen, there's no one else in the family who can challenge me for my position. Her own grandchildren, and so she kills them all off, minus one in 2 Chronicles 22. You get out of there in the book of Esther, and Haman tries to wipe out the entire Jewish race. Again and again and again, we see Satan trying to end the Jews. It's something that's gone on throughout history, all the way up until the birth of the Messiah, and he didn't quit after that, right? I mean, he kept going after them in anger because of that. And it's even good to note that all these specific attempts of Satan to take out the royal line, the bloodline of the Messiah, you also find throughout the Old Testament too many places to mention where he wins them over to idolatry, and through an ancient form of abortion, they sacrifice their own children to the gods, right? They would take their own kids, they'd worship the gods, they'd worship Ashtoreth, and then they'd produce babies through that worship, and then they'd offer the babies up as sacrifices, and that was all part of the game. And Satan's the one behind it all. He's the one behind it all. You may never warrant the attention of Satan, but the demons, where it says a third of the stars fell with him, they followed after. That 1/3 of the heavenly hosts, they joined teams with him. Now, that's a big number, because the Bible numbers the angels as many as the stars of the sky, And the Bible also numbers them as many as the sands of the sea. And what's funny is that some years ago, some statistician or whatever, actually, this is like not even using the Bible, I don't think the guy was a believer, said that the number of sand in the sea is actually a similar number to the stars in the sky, that they're actually a related number. That statistically speaking, that they're about the same. But that's how many angels there are. There's a lot of stars. Just think of the sea. Maybe you haven't counted every star in the sky, but you've seen a sandy beach shore. You're imagining all the sand in the sea. 1/3 fell, but we still got 2/3 on our side. So that's a good reminder. But he's got these fallen demons, and again and again and again, he's attacking Israel. He's attacking this messianic line. It says, right, to devour her child as soon as it was born. And at the very end of the section we're not even going to do the whole chapter today, but at the end we'll look one more time at just how God has protected his people and how Satan has tried to destroy his people. But listen to this quote from Mark Twain. Unbeliever, atheist, I mean, he's not even a deist. He didn't believe in God at all. But listen to this. He said, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, and Persians rose, filled the planet with sound and splendor. They faded to dream stuff and passed away. The Greeks and Romans followed and made a vast noise, and they were gone. Other people have sprung up and held their torch high for a time, but it burned out. And they sit in twilight now and have vanished. The Jews saw them all, survived them all, and is now what he has always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert but aggressive mind. All things are mortal but the Jews. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? An unbeliever recognizes this of these people. What's their secret? Why is it that you can scatter them across the globe and that they remain Jewish? They never assimilate. I mean, we all see this because realistically, I'm scanning the room. I don't think any of us have our heritage nailed down to the Northwest. You know, either we've migrated from the South, or we've migrated from Europe, or we've migrated from some other place. And we're all very American now. Some of us hold true to some of our roots a little more than others, but that's what happens. And even if you try and remain as Dutch as you want, or as Mexican as you want, or as German as you want, your grandkids are going to be real American after being here for 2 generations. The Jews were spread out for 2,000 years, and they were 100% Jewish when they returned home. They never assimilated. They always held true to this. So Satan would want to do that, but it doesn't happen. And it says in verse 5, she bore a male child. Here's the promise of Messiah, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and his throne. So, the idea is ruling with a rod of iron. Now, Psalm 2, verse 9, or you could even just flip back to chapter 2 of Revelation, verse 27, because it says, he who overcomes, in verse 26, I will give power to the nations, and it quotes Psalm 2, he shall rule them with a rod of iron, they shall be dashed to pieces like potter's vessels, I also have received from my Father. So Jesus speaking makes it very clear that he is the one who has the rod of iron. He's promising that you guys can rule with me in the kingdom, but he's the one with the rod of iron. So this male child is obviously Jesus Christ. Now, in this vision, we've jumped all the way back to the beginning, right? We jumped back to Genesis, and now we're getting all the way up to the crucifixion, because it says, she bores him, but then he's caught up to heaven, to God, and to his throne. It's the ascension. He's crucified, buried, resurrected, ascends into heaven, and then 2,000 years pass between verse 5 and verse 6. And the Bible does that. Just keeps moving right along. You go through Isaiah, you read promises of Jesus, and it's always his first coming, and the next halfway through the verse, it's talking about the second coming. So in verse 6, it says, then the woman fled into the wilderness where she has a place prepared by God that they should feed her there 1,260 days. So, here we have her fleeing into the wilderness. I'm actually going to flip over to Matthew 24 because this is spoken of explicitly by Jesus. So Jesus is going to talk about that midpoint in the tribulation, right? That 1,260 days, that describes half of a 7-year period. And Jesus in Matthew 24, starting in verse 15 on the Olivet Discourse, where he's up on the Mount of Olives, he says, "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand." Ooh, there's a good reason why we flip and read, because there's those promises. He's talking about Daniel 9, that the Antichrist is going to come. He's going to set up an image in the temple and demand to be worshipped. Next chapter in Revelation, you're going to find out about the false prophet who is like the sidekick to the Antichrist. And he's going to set up an image, and actually it's pretty cool. Kind of weird, kind of cool, but it's cool to me. The image is going to come to life. So there's actually an image to worship, but it's actually going to come to life, and people are going to worship this image. So this is setting up the image in the temple. So Jesus says, when you see this, verse 16, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who's on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house, and let him who's in the field not go back to get his clothes. And he goes on, but woe to those who are pregnant, or if it's on the Sabbath, verse 20, 21, for then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been seen since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. So he's saying, this is the great tribulation starting. And some of you may have caught before that, when you talk about the 7 years of tribulation, the latter half is often called the great tribulation. That it's actually not 7 years of great tribulation, but that is in fact 3.5 of the tribulation. And then that second half is even more intense. And it's hard to imagine more intense than what we've already covered up until this point. But that is the great tribulation. And it says in verse 6, back in Revelation 12, they're going to flee into the wilderness. So, where exactly are they going to flee? Well, it tells us in a few places in the Bible that they're going to flee into the region of Edom. And if you've been to Israel, or you kind of know the maps of the area, we're talking about the Dead Sea. Try to do this for you guys. Jerusalem's over here. And then you go down, or I guess Jerusalem's like up there. Dead Sea. Edom's like the opposite corner of the Dead Sea from Jerusalem. So for those of us who got turned around because of flash floods, if we had ever made it to our destination, or then the opposite corner of the Dead Sea. That's where Edom is. And specifically in Edom, we find Petra. We find the city of Petra. Now, there's a few other verses that make reference real quick. In Isaiah 16, it specifically names Selah as a city, or Selah. I don't know exactly how to say it, because there's Selah with an H in the Bible also. That's different. In Hebrew, it means rock. And in Greek, the word rock is Petra. And that's where Jesus names Peter, Petra, so you're a rock. And so it's the rock city of Petra. In Micah, it makes another name. It's also called Gorza. It's another name for the city. In Daniel 11, it specifically says Edom, Moab, Ammon, that whole area down there. But that's where they're going to flee to. You guys is this way. I always do it right in my mind, but for you it's that way. They flee down there. Now, what's cool is that I'm assuming most people in the room, at least people my age and older, are hopefully familiar with Indiana Jones, because we all know the rock city of Petra from the movie in Indiana Jones. I'm trying to see if my slide will work, but my slides are going real slow today. So, Indiana Jones, the rock city of Petra, the Last Crusade, where they get the Holy Grail. In there, there's a... Will you get the picture, please? Sorry. This is not working. Just FYI, you can edit this out later. So, rock city of Petra. There we got Indy, right? And Sala, and all these cool guys. John Rhys Davies is in the Return to the Hiding Place remake of the Corey Tenboom movie. So Sala is in that. They're fast facts. He's in a lot of Christian movies these days, so I'm assuming he's a believer. We got one more picture, though. So you've seen the movie. That's Petra. This is a big tourist attraction these days, obviously, because you see them going down those winding caverns, which still are winding caverns, but just outside the caverns are many, many hotels and tourist locations to buy stuff. And about 1,000 Jews, specifically Jews from Israel, come a day to tour around Petra. Now that's just like the beginning. They don't got any pictures in the movie where you really see the depths of inside of the caves, the caverns, of where they built into the walls, the Edomites. And actually, if you can read, I think in Habakkuk about the Edomites, that they were cave dwellers, and they would hide in there, and no one could really attack them because, I mean, they were deep in these caves. It's hard to go in and attack. But that area can hold like 200,000 people. So a lot of people could escape and hide in there. And when it talks about that the woman, she fled, and she's being preserved by God, this would specifically be, I think, the Jews who were not already saved. This is my theory. The ones who were kind of worshiping at the new temple, right? And they were kind of in with the Antichrist. Because I think the ones who are already saved, they're already gone. They're not hanging out around Jerusalem where the Antichrist is. But it's when the two witnesses, they're killed and they're resurrected, it says, and then a bunch of people started to glorify God. And they're there. All of a sudden, he wants to be worshipped as God in the temple. There's an earthquake. 7,000 people die. And I think a whole bunch of Jews, it's like, bing, light goes off. And they all leave. You can't book a plane at this point. You can't get a bus at this point. Whatever you can get to on foot, on a horse, or on your own car, right? And where do you go? Well, they flee to Petra. It's not that, it's about an hour and a half drive from Jerusalem. Just you book it, get around the other side of the Dead Sea, and it's a place you can hide. And next week we'll even look at how he tries to attack them, and it makes sense in that area. But it says, so we have the woman, Israel, hiding from the dragon, Satan. And now we have a change of scenes. It's pretty cool in verse 7. In verse 7 it says, and war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. So here we have Michael fighting Satan. And this is just so cool. Like, this is like a movie I would love to see. And I mean, maybe not everyone's on my page. Guys, bear with me, right? Like, no, ladies, bear with me. Guys, get excited with me. How cool would this be to see Michael? What does Michael look like? I'm imagining like Arnold Schwarzenegger from his Conan days, okay? But in lots of cool armor. And like, remember, guard me, there was a flaming sword. I mean, like, I want one of those in heaven. Like, it'll give me a flaming sword and one of those other things. It would be so cool to watch. And I can only imagine Michael. Here's an interesting thought. I know a few weeks ago I mentioned that in Jewish tradition there was 7 archangels. In the Bible, interesting is that there is only one angel listed as an archangel in the Bible, and that's Michael. No other angel is called an archangel. Some people assume maybe Satan was, and maybe Gabriel. Now Gabriel, he always seems to be tied with bringing that message of the Messiah in, and Gabriel's got an important job, but he's never called an archangel. Satan is called a cherub. So, I mean, can he be a cherub and an archangel? We don't really know. We only have limited supply when it comes to the study of angels.